Deb, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Just wondering if you're interested in the chair's position. So I'd like to nominate.
I can, but I can't chair today because I'm on my phone and I've never used the phone on Zoom before.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I hope I can get through it. I can't get it open on my laptop, so I tried my phone.
How are you feeling?
Still a cough and a cold, and tired, but much better than I was, thanks. You didn't get it?
I got a cold, that's all.
Yeah. Lots of people came home with COVID.
Yes.
Was that the UBCM?
Yes, it was.
I've heard. I was just talking to somebody at Victoria, and apparently half city council came back with COVID from the UBCM.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I'm glad I left the UBCM when I did. Evidently, it was a good call. I just got a cold on the way back from Ontario without COVID, though. And that was 5 days ago, so everyone can rest assured we're okay. I will, because we don't have a chair at this time, I will call this meeting to order, and I will flag with everyone attending that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. I also want to start off by acknowledging that we're conducting our business today on the traditional territory of the Huipachesset and Tashat Nations. We're grateful for our ability to be here, to live, work, and play. I will start by doing some introductions around the room, and then I will hand it off to Heather Zenner to conduct an election for another chair. So I'm Daniel Sayon, the Chief Administrative Officer for the ACRD, and I will go counterclockwise. Heather.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Zenner, the Manager of Administrative Services.
Nancy Harvey, Member at Large for Sprout Lake.
Klama Penikote. I am the Electoral Area Director for Sprout Lake.
Mike Sparrow, Electoral Area of Cherry Creek.
Darren Harding, Associate Principal with HCMA Architecture, consultant for the feasibility study.
John Buttery, an architect with HCMA out of the Victoria office, also with the consultants on the feasibility study.
Hi, Wendy Thompson, General Manager of Administrative Services for the Regional District.
And Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer for the Regional District.
Fred Boyko, Electoral Area Director for Beaufort.
Good afternoon, Sarah Henshaw. I'm with the Alberni Valley Aquatics Center Advisory Committee, Cherry Creek.
I'm Heather Thompson. I'm Communications Coordinator for the ACRD. And I'm Willa Thorpe. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Heritage for the City of Port Alberni.
Thank you. For those that are online, we can see your name tags. And so, hi. And I will now hand it over to Heather Zenner to conduct an auction.
Thanks, Daniel. All right, so we have to elect a new chairperson for this committee. I will do a call for nominations in a moment, but because we've got people on Zoom and in the room, if we do have an election, I'll print out ballots for the people in the room. And I guess it's just for Debbie online. I would ask you to email me your vote if we do have an election. If we don't have an election, that'll be much easier. So saying that, I will call for nominations for a chairperson of the Alberni Valley Aquatics Center Advisory Committee for the remainder of 2023 for a first time. Go ahead, Penny.
I'd like to nominate Debbie Haggard.
Thank you. Debbie, would you accept the nomination?
I would be happy to accept the nomination, except I'm on my phone today by Zoom, and I'm having a bit of difficulty. So if I could accept the chairperson, if nobody else wants it, if somebody else would be willing to chair the meeting today, though.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I'll call for nominations for chairperson of the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center Advisory Committee for the remainder of 2023 for a second time. And call for nominations for chairperson of the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center Advisory Committee for the remainder of 2023 for a third time. And being that there's no further nominations, I hereby declare Debbie Haggard as the chair of the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center Advisory Committee for the remainder of 2023.
Thank you much. Before we move on with the meeting, I'd like to thank Ron Paulson for the work that he did up so far. Unfortunately, they'd have to quit due to health reasons. So I'd like to personally thank Ron for his contribution to date. And I'm sure we can get him back on board at a later time when he's feeling better.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. Do you mind chairing for the remainder of or would the committee like to appoint somebody else in the room to chair the rest of the meeting?
Just because I'm having some difficulties, can somebody else chair the meeting for today? That would be so awesome.
Yeah,
I couldn't get my Zoom link to work through my laptop, so I tried my phone, but I'm having some difficulties. I'm not too bright.
Okay, Penny will chair the rest of the meeting. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, thank you, Debbie, for stepping up, and everybody else for being here. So we have a approval of the agenda. Need a motion? Is there any additions or I see, I think maybe we can use the mics too.
Oh, okay. I'll give you a motion for anything.
Thank you, Brad. And seconded
I'll second the motion.
by Mike. All right. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Thank you. All right. Minutes of the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center Advisory Committee meeting held June 29th. I need a motion to approve.
The agenda or the minutes, sorry.
Thank you, Brad.
I'll second.
Nancy Harvey. Second. Is there anyone opposed or any changes? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. On to reports. That's a verbal report, selected apportionment model debrief. And that would be Danielle.
Yeah, I can start and then I'll ask Terry if there's any additional pieces that I'm missing. I wanted to just flag with the committee that staff brought forward a discussion piece to the board around apportionment, and we brought it forward because we felt that when it comes to apportionment, which is how we break apart the costs per community and per household, that was better for us to get guidance from the board on that one rather than put the committee in the position of making that decision. And we really felt that the committee's helping us guide our public interaction, the information that's going to the public, the survey details, and to help assess the information coming back. But when it comes to apportionment, this is something that ultimately is more political in nature, and we wanted to. We went directly to the board in order to get some clarity on that. So what we ended up doing is we did get a resolution from the board supporting a 50-50 apportionment model. And what we are going to do today when HCMA is going through the survey, there is an apportionment section, and we'll go into details around what that means and why with the committee. But the purpose of flagging it today is we really wanted to make sure that you understood why. And if you have questions, please ask. But we, from a staff perspective, we really felt that it was perhaps unfair to put the committee in a position of making something that could be really politically charged. And that's not the intent of the committee. We don't want you in a potentially politically charged environment. So more than talking aquatics already is. So the 50-50 apportionment model that is identified really breaks apart population and assessed value. And we chose it because it's a bit of the middle road. so to speak. We can choose, or we can develop just about any kind of model that we can think of. But the apportioned model here, that's 50-50, is equitable for discussion purposes, in that it doesn't put all the eggs in one basket, so to speak. If it was purely population, there are winners and losers with that one. If it's purely assessed value, there are winners and losers there. Splitting the difference is one that sort of lowers the extreme for some communities, like say Sprout Lake, that would have a higher assessed value, so it lowers that impact and buffers it for population, and then increases in other areas such as Port Alberni that has a larger population. What can be confusing when people see an apportionment model is that they may think that if they look at what a household, an average household and population mix for Port Alberni looks like, they may see a lower number and think, well, why is Port Alberni paying less? But what they're forgetting is that there are many more households in Port Alberni. So the total amount is going to be larger when you look at it that way. So we feel it's the most equitable way of having the conversation around the aquatics model. It by no way forces us to adopt that model when we go into things like referendums and larger discussions, but it is a middle of the road discussion formula. You'll see it in action today when we talk about some of these details. But with that, if there are any questions, here and Terry's here today to help answer those questions.
So I have a question right off the top. The library bills the regional district 50% assessment, 50% per capita. But then when it goes to the regional district, it's billed out to the rural areas by assessment based only. So how would you put that onto our tax bills? Thanks.
Yeah, so two parts. Yes, the library, like Vancouver Island Regional Library, apportions between the members in terms of regional districts on a 50% population, 50% land and improvements model. And then the regional district bylaw states that we apportion within our regional district to the electoral areas, which are the participants of our service, by land and improvements only. So that is the way our bylaw is formed. In this case, you cannot tax people. So as much as we are apportioning, meaning dividing the pie by 50% population, 50% land and improvements, in the end, it still becomes a land and improvements tax rate. So it just, by taking that population factor, it just removes a little bit of the impact of the range in assessed values and the very high assessed values, for example, that are in Sprout Lake in being waterfront in comparison to many of the other areas. So it just adds that extra factor. But in the end, you are taxing solely on a person's house value. Yes. Your other options besides doing house value is we could tax on improvements only, or it could be as a parcel tax. Pros and cons to all of those, of course. Improvements only means you're not capturing raw land, including like forestry lands and stuff, which are at different tax rates anyways, but you're removing all of that component because you're really at that point only taxing the structures. And then parcel tax, of course, is per parcel. Lots of people have multiple parcels, but are kind of acting as one parcel, so they would then be paying more tax. But yeah, there's frontage options that's usually used more for like water and utility lines or curb roadside billing. Lots of options, but yes, in this model, we would still be taxing on the basis of land and improvements.
Anyone have questions? Fred?
When are we going to see some of these numbers? Is that coming up like right now?
So today, when we run through the survey, you're going to see some placeholder numbers that are not meant to be the actual numbers. The actual numbers are going to be in the survey. And so when people run through the survey, when that is built and issued later on this month, we actually have some appropriate, what to call them, quantity surveying staff that are going to go through everything to make sure that the costs are relevant to today's number. And so when people are working through the survey model, they'll be able to add and remove things that are appropriately costed, and then that'll be broken down to a per household cost. And so that's why HCMA is here today. They're going to walk through all of those. We will see numbers today. They are not the correct numbers. I just want to be clear with that. As the public is watching, I don't want media running and saying, oh, here's the number. That number will be different at the end of the month. Whether higher or lower, it's just going to be properly vetted and adjusted. But for the purposes of doing the survey today, you're going to see some rough numbers because we needed to have a placeholder for you to see the model at work.
Question for Terry. Just for reference, how was the new hospital, our two larger projects, the new hospital and the arena, how were those taxed?
So the hospital is land and improvements, but for the entire regional district, so Tofino, Ucluelet, Bamfield, are also Long Beach are also involved in that project, as the vice versa. When we go to Tofino General Hospital, the Alberni Valley will be paying for that on the basis of land and improvements. The arena was a parcel tax. It was done under an interesting model that the province says will not happen again. So basically, the debt was owned by the city of Port Alberni. No, sorry, the asset was owned by the city of Port Alberni, and the regional district owned the debt, which doesn't match up very well. And it was requisitioned by parcel tax. There was an opportunity to prepay your parcel tax if you wanted to, and there was referendums done in each of the Alberni Valley electoral areas and the city of Port Alberni separately. And in the end, it was Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, Cherry Creek, and the city of Port Alberni that were all on parcel tax for that facility. And that was for capital costs only. There was no contribution to the city for operating that facility.
Daniel?
And because apportionment models and how it is people pay for things in general can be complex and is often contentious, we are actually going to have a separate session to talk apportionment with board directors at the board itself later on. And the reason why we're doing that is that assuming all this work continues forward, we're going to end up back at a community table of sorts, elected officials definitely, to talk about what would be the correct financing model for bringing this forward. And that applies to more than just aquatics. We've had many conversations around regional trails and parks and, what's the right way of doing that? Or any new service that we would potentially entertain creating or amending existing services as we see things change over time. We always talk about what's equitable, and that's a loaded term when it comes to who's paying for what. But it all boils down to how we create that financial formula for how people pay. And so that's why we didn't want to bog down this committee with those details, but it is a very pertinent conversation to have with elected officials, and it applies to more than just aquatics. So we sort of bridged that into a different direction. We chose something for the purposes of this model that we're going to use in the survey, and then we're going to come back with the elected officials first to talk about how we create models that we think are equitable, starting with aquatics.
Thank you. So I'd like some clarification too. So this is costing of the facility only, not the service.
So when we run through this, you'll see in the modeling that there's three elements here. We're going to be talking about the cost of building it. We're going to talk about the cost of running it. And we're going to have a very brief discussion around asset management because the cost of eventually replacing is something that we have to do as well. And that's going to be part of the conversation today in terms of, do we make assumptions? Do we remove it? Do we leave a portion in or not? is something that is important for us to talk about. So those are the three components that are going to build up the number that people see.
So we're not separating.
No, we're packaging into one number, and we've at least that's what we're recommending at this time. Is the concern we have with breaking all the parts, all the pieces apart, is that it starts confusing people. And what we don't want is people thinking, well, I thought it was this lower number, and I didn't understand that that operations had to be there. But how do you have a pool without having staff in it, right? And so we feel packaging it all together makes sense. The big question at the end of the day will be less the operations and capital, and be more the asset management, because even though it's not truly optional, because the province wants us to include in any of our financing models some asset management elements, what's tough for the committee to actually resolve is what's that number? Because asset management is challenging for any community to figure out, and to just really simplify it. If you have a $10 million project that taxpayers today pay for all of it, and as they're paying for that, usually with debt, if you put asset management in and you say, well, at the end of the debt, you're also going to be able to replace it, replace that asset, then the taxpayer rightfully can say, well, hold on, so I'm paying 20 million, right? So I'm paying for it today and I'm going to pay to replace it tomorrow. So why can't the taxpayer tomorrow pay a portion of that? And that's where it gets really confusing, because we have to figure out some sort of magic number in terms of assumptions to be made. If you're replacing the asset, do you replace cash, or do you anticipate that you'll be taking on new debt come that time?
I've read.
Thank you, Chair. Question for we're going to talk about here. So we're going to talk about three things: capital cost, operating cost, and then future replacement of asset management. When you look at operating costs, what are you basing it on? Are you basing it on the City of Port Alberni running it, or a separate entity? The reason I'm asking that is very specific, because the current staffing of the current pool, most of the time, every week, there's some kind of shutdown. We're shut down for every Sunday for the next year, that kind of thing. Are we looking at doing the same kind of model, or we looked at different models for that? Because I don't know if that's the most sustainable thing moving forward. Thank you.
Whoever.
Yeah, I'll start if that's great. So we run operational cost analysis, and part of that information is taken from the existing facility. It's a good starting place for us to understand the community needs, but we also benchmark it against other communities, as well as what we also see as just needed for a new facility and with new kind of demands on it. So it won't just be taking the existing facility numbers, but it'll be overlaying some additional layers on top of that.
Thank you. Be good to see. Thank you.
How would First Nations work into this?
So similar to other models, when we have a 50-50 apportionment model, the population side helps us the most on that one. And so similar to other models right now, we can use that to identify what would be their costs, because assessed values are hard to achieve in some scenarios. So similar to what we're, for a point of reference for elected officials, similar to the conversation we're having around West Coast Transit. We see that the nations there would be paying a portion, and that's calculated in a similar way.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, I guess then on to the next.
Yeah. So I'll start off here, but we're really glad to be here with you and to receive feedback and guidance from this group here today. Where we're at in the stage, in this process of the feasibility stage, is that we went to the community in the spring of this year. We received great feedback, and now we're moving into phase 2 of our community engagement. And so we are preparing a survey that will launch likely the end of October. And this survey is intended to receive community feedback on desired components for a future aquatic center. And so what we want to do today is go through the survey as we've structured it, and we're looking for approval from this group in terms of the components that we are offering to the community to vote on. And so you'll also see a number of different areas within the survey that provides financial guidance to the public as they're doing it. And so we'll be looking for feedback from yourselves on that as well, and how we're addressing the taxation impact. And so we'll be addressing that and through kind of text descriptions in the survey. And so we're looking for feedback from this group on how we're presenting it, the tone, and making sure that we're capturing it correctly, as well as the components that we're offering the public to vote on. And so if there's any of these components that we feel like this should be taken off the table, or we should be adding other ones onto it so that we can give that to the public, then this is the perfect time to make those decisions. As soon as we receive approval from this group on the components and the options that we're going to give to the public, that's when we'll take that away and we will get our quantity surveyor to provide dollar figures for each of those components. You'll see in the survey, we have placeholder figures included today, so you can kind of get an estimate of what's going to be there, but those are not 100% accurate. So they'll get refined once we have approval on what the components are that we're sharing with the community. So that's kind of the goal of today, is for you guys to see the survey, see how it's structured, see what we're saying to the community or proposing to say to the community, and for you guys to have an opportunity to provide feedback and let us know if the tone isn't right or if the components need to be adjusted.
Questions? Fred.
So I just had one question. So we said we had great feedback from the first survey and round of consultations. So we had about 1,250 responses, plus or minus. So that, what percentage of the population? That's like 5.5%, 6% of the entire ACRE 33,000 people, right? How are we going to get more feedback from the people? If we're going to spend multiple tens of millions of dollars, we should try and endeavor to get more than 5 or 6% of the population. So just in general, for everybody, how can we get a better response from the people before we actually go to a referendum and all that kind of stuff that's upcoming? Thank you.
Who'd like to respond?
I'll jump in. So we're starting with the creation of the survey, and how that survey then gets rolled out is open for debate. Online, we feel is the easiest portion for people to be able to answer in their own space on their own time. But we do like the idea of going to where people are to encourage them. Right? So whether or not we have an open house format, certainly I think what we learned last time with the open house is that it wasn't well attended compared to the online, but it is a good reminder for people that this is going on and that they can actually come in. I don't know that we would do 2 separate locations again, but certainly the ability to go directly to people, seniors, schools, etc., to walk them through that survey together is one of the ideas that we want to advance as well.
Any other questions? Seeing none, carry on.
Okay, so I think what we have the actual survey format, online format. We'll present our screens and we'll walk through the different pages, and invite you to. You're welcome to pause us as we go through. You can ask questions per page, or you can wait and you can add them at the end. Either way, but we'll walk through each page and let you provide feedback on it. We'll have some targeted questions as we go.
Deb, did you have any questions?
Hey everyone. So I think everyone can see the screen up here now. So as Darren mentioned, this is the draft survey for the second round of public engagement, where we're presenting back to the public what we've heard from the first round and presenting options that can then be put together with some cost feedback. So I'll roll through the different sections of the survey, and please just raise your hand if you have a question we can discuss. Sorry. So the first page is a welcome page, sort of introducing this study, phase 2 outreach on options, and noting the first survey was completed in June 2023. And some of the key things that we heard was that a new facility should be family friendly and fun, balanced, focused.
Sorry. I'll turn it off.
So we're all having little issues just being able to read it. I mean, my eyes are still good, but is there a way to see it without looking at the website, just so the whole thing is blown up? You know what I mean? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can just sort of zoom in on some of the, I think as we go, you should be able to see most of it. And I don't think it's necessary to read every bit of text that's on the screen. I'll just sort of hit the highlights, but it is a working draft on a website. So this is kind of the best way that we have to present it right now. But if you can't read something, just stop and I'm happy to read it out to you. So a few of the key things that we learned from the first round are family friendly and fun, sort of desires for a new space, a balanced focus on leisure, skill development, recreational, swimming, and fitness, accessible to all ages and abilities, and affordable to the community. Okay, thanks, Darren. So then if we thank you. So the next page will provide some project background. And I think the key points from this page will just be providing context that the existing Echo Center has provided some great service, but it's 57 years old now and shutdown times are increasing. And there will come a point in the future where the pool is no longer able to be operational and serve the needs of the community. And so then just a reminder that the ACRD is leading the study looking at the possibility of a new aquatic center to replace the Echo pool. And then we'll provide a little bit of context as well to replace the Echo pool today with the same amenities, like for like, would be estimated at approximately $40 million. And so then this survey will provide participants with the ability to choose amenities that they feel are important and have cost feedback. So if we go to the next page. So before we get into the selecting of amenities, this is a little bit more project background and describes how the costs are structured. So the base costs are, I guess the way the idea of how this works is that there's the base building, which includes lobby, change rooms, a wet multipurpose room, building envelope, and facility support. These are all items that would be required no matter what. And then as participants progress, they're able to add additional elements onto that building to sort of create a building of their own. So the base cost will have sort of a base cost estimate, which has got 20 million in there right now as a placeholder, but that will be updated once we move forward. And so the operating costs, as Darren mentioned, they'll be based on, it's something that we're working on right now, but it'll be based on existing Echo and as well as benchmarking of other facilities. And so for some elements, as you add them, the operating costs may increase because it may require additional staff or mechanical, et cetera. And then the asset management costs. This is going back to Daniel's comments related to saving for replacement of the facility. So I don't know if we wanted to at this point have more discussion about that, but yes.
So I just got two high-level questions here. What are the current maintenance costs? When will they become unsustainable? If we're having leaks, what's the leak rate? And one thing that we're not looking at here at all, if we're going to look at something that's like for like, why can't we shut this thing off for a year, rip it apart, and rebuild it for $10 million as opposed to spending 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times that price for a new facility? It's already in a good spot. But just putting that out there. Is that something that we're looking at home? Thank you.
I'll start. So in terms of current operating costs and leaks and whatnot, I can't answer that. Maybe Will might have that, but I think there's some level of detail there that we need to actually look into. I don't think it's top of mind information. Why we're not looking at renovating the existing. So the previous studies that were done in outreach that was done through Alan Nielsen and Associates with the previous board sort of created the framework for the work that we're doing here. And what the previous board had established is that this wasn't something that they were looking to renovate. It was something that they were looking to rebuild. And so it sort of falls, not that it's a bad question, but it falls outside of the scope of what we were looking to do. And so we don't have a point of comparison in terms of the cost of renovation. I think, going further into that, and I wasn't part of the discussions with Mr. Nielsen or the former board, but it does become problematic to shut down an existing facility for a year, as an example, if it only takes that to renovate it, in that the potential loss of staff and rehiring staff. I know there's layoff processes and whatnot, but the reality is that it's the loss of programming for that window of time, that period of time that is challenging, and the implications for staff and HR that can be challenging. Again, I don't know if that's part of why that decision was made, but I would certainly flag it today as being one of the challenges if we're going to have a long-term shutdown. I know I didn't answer all your questions, but that's all I have to offer on that front right now.
Right.
Willa, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you put out some good points. Staff HR challenges, they already exist, right? We all know that place has daily closures or weekly closures and more than that. And if the previous board established that, I just want to make sure we're visiting it and making sure that was a good decision at the time, from a public financial perspective, making sure that's put out there and people know the background and what was done. Thank you.
I think that there was actually a study done years ago regarding the condition of the pool. My husband does the annual inspection as part of that, and it's in need of a lot of things. I'm not sure if Willa wants to add anything to that, or no. Okay.
No, I'm just saying, first perspective of someone that's going to vote on spending multiple millions of dollars, and as a professional engineer that does piping for a living, these should be questions that are answered and put out in the public so everyone's aware of it as a public facility. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering if we could dig up any of those old reports to share with this committee.
We can certainly look into see what's readily available. I wouldn't recommend throwing it into this survey, but in terms of a report to the board, I think if there's additional information, that's something that we could do as a complement to what HCMA does.
Great, thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I struggled with a definition even for time soon for replacement. I'm curious, what does that mean? Is time soon 5 years, 10 years? So as a taxpayer or even as my age, what's it really going to cost me? So I think a little bit of, what's the estimated lifespan of the current building would be somewhat helpful. My other comment is the assets requiring replacement. like a few examples. So again, you were talking about the double cost. What would that include? And even if it's a slight link, it doesn't have to be in the details and muddy this. There could be a couple links attached here, such as you just discussed the previous plan.
Mike,
Thank you. I'm sort of the same question in a way. Like you said, the 30-year replacement cost for your asset management, is that reasonable? Like, the pool we have now is 50 years. Is 30 years. And the second thing is this kind of sidestep to this, we have the ice arena. Is that having asset management costs associated that we're paying for now, or is that going to be part up later and taxed on top of that?
So typically, I mean, 30 years is generous. So typically on an aquatics facility, you'd look at some degree of significant overhaul or investment anywhere between 20 and 25 years. I think 30 years is sort of a happy middle to our 57. My understanding with Echo Pool is that we actually haven't done any of that over the last 57 years. So in terms of the life of not the building itself, but of really the mechanical stuff that's in there, we're in essence on borrowed time. And I think the length of the shutdowns is just showing that, right? So whenever you have dated equipment, Fred could probably speak better than I can to this, but the problem with not staying on top of some of these key changes is that some of the key components stop being built, stop being manufactured. Companies are no longer available for certain key parts, and when that occurs, your wait times to either have something specifically manufactured that no longer is off the shelf increases, and at some point it may become just completely obsolete and impossible to get, or in a cost-effective or timely way. And so this is where typically you want to look at your asset replacements based on a recommendation out of the industry. In this case, we're using 30 years. That may adjust in the final survey. Our previous report, I think, talked about 25 years. But that's where we would expect to make an updated investment. Is 25 years after the completion of construction. We would then look to do a bit of an overhaul at that point. Great examples are, if you look at Echo Pool in Falcon Beach, it's not that far away. It was built in the 90s, and now they're doing their significant renovation, or they're proceeding down that path. Again, we like stretching the life of some of these facilities. We're not unique. Every community does it. I think where we're unique is that we managed to get this far. 57 years is an accomplishment with the age of the infrastructure that's there. Not the shell of the building, that's not uncommon, although I would have concerns when we open it up in terms of asbestos and other things, and meeting today's building codes, but of the actual mechanical, this is the bigger issue. I do not know what Port Alberni does for other assets in the community, so that'd be a great question that I can forward to my counterpart when it comes to the arena. But this is the first time we get to manage an outreach, and so under our purview, it's important to think about asset management. The tough conversation around asset management is what's fair for this generation to pay. So, and this is why it seems silly to be talking with schools and high school and whatnot, but realistically and statistically speaking, if people go to university and then come back to Port Alberni, which a lot of people do, the kids that we'll be asking today are likely the ones that are going to be paying for the next round under asset management. And so whether or not we stow away 25% of replacement costs, 50%, 100% or zero, is a question that's pertinent to them and it's pertinent to the taxpayer today.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. So next item on this page would be the estimated household costs. So this is the proposed mechanism to convey to the participants of the survey the financial impact per household. So the estimated annual tax implication per household for a new aquatic center that includes base, operating, asset renewal and pool design options that are selected in the survey. And this is based on the estimated household, the average assessed values for each of the 5 areas: Port Alberni, Beaufort, Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, Cherry Creek, using the apportionment method that Daniel described, of 50% population and 50% land improvements. And the data for determining the average assessed value is all taken from BC assessment. And then if we scroll down, we'll just sort of provide that information with an asterisk and a better font type. And as we progress through the survey, you'll see that this information will be displayed on the right-hand side, just sort of where it says next. So you'll be able to see the sort of real-time taxation impacts. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. Population statistics are coming from where? 2021 census or population per parcel? How is that done? Thank you.
I can answer that. So it's off of census, the last, and it would be updated with every census if that ends up being the chosen method in an establishing bylaw.
But that also includes First Nations in Sprout Lake population. So how does that get taken out?
So, populations for non-treaty nations are counted as part of the area they're in. So whether in Sprout Lake or Cherry Creek or Beaver Creek, wherever a reserve is, the nations will be counted in as that general population. So then what we have to do then is create an adjustment for that when we're talking about invoicing back to the nations.
Nancy?
I'm sorry, I'm too detail oriented. Your average assessed values, can you state what year it is?
Thank you. Okay, so the next page will be just another page for general knowledge, and it will describe the apportionment model so that it's clear to everyone who's taking the survey, the assumptions that are made. And this, I won't read through, but we'll just explain essentially what Daniel explained previously. So any questions on that one before we move through?
Sorry, I see 2 chat questions. I don't know if we should address that before we keep going or not.
The question asked about renovating versus building a new center. It was said that the previous board discussed this. What was the name of this for people who would like to look into this further? Oh, I didn't know it showed up there.
Yeah, I think similar to the question that was made, we can dig all that up and then we'll bring it as part of the report to the board.
The second one is accessibility / estimated rate usage considered when determining the taxation of this facility? It seems unlikely that residents in Tofino or Ucluelet will be benefiting the same as Port Alberni residents.
I can, another good question, but I think maybe some of those questions would be a good question at the end. But we're not talking about Tofino or Ucluelet here. We're talking about the Alberni Valley and those in immediate reach of the existing facilities. So the nations, Beaufort, I say the nations, sorry, Chesson, Sham specifically, but also discussions with some of the treaty nations that do have population bases here, such as Huaya, Uchuckwissett, as 2 great examples. And then we're talking about Beaufort, Cherry Creek, Sprout Lake, and Beaver Creek.
You.
I have a question to Terry. So when it is based on assessment and population, would we be changing our bylaw then
on how we would be able to tax people?
We currently do not have a bylaw for a Alberni Valley aquatic facility. So as part of building the establishing bylaw and all the pieces that are required to be determined going into a referendum, it would be during that time that we would set what that apportionment method is, and then it would get built into the bylaw itself. So you could determine, you don't have to go off of Stats Canada census numbers. We could use BC stat census numbers. There's a number of different options for that. We just have to clearly define what we are using to indicate that amount. So for example, if you're wanting to take the on reserve numbers out of the census populations, then we'd have to clearly define that into the calculation that's built into the establishing bylaw itself. But at this point, this is a proposed service, so we don't have establishing bylaw.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks. So moving on, the next page is the how to participate page. So we've gone through some sort of educational pieces, and this page just sort of sets a quick roadmap for how to proceed through the survey itself, inviting participants to share their views on the different potential features of a new aquatic center, and just providing a small roadmap going forward, which you'll see in a moment. This is a video from another engagement that we were involved in. We can create something similar, just essentially walks people through a video of someone showing how to navigate through the survey. So just a placeholder for the moment. So if we move to the next page, and just apologies on some of the size of the images, it's still a draft, but I'll just sort of talk through it here. So the pool is the first sort of set of options. So a new facility would include both a leisure pool and a lap pool. And through the survey, participants will be able to make selections about different features within both pools and the size. So on this page, we'll provide some information about what a leisure pool is and what a lap pool is, the type of activities that you can do in both, and just a quick description. And so then we'll move on to looking for some feedback into the lap tank. And the three options that we'll be seeking feedback on are a 25-meter 6-lane lap pool, a 25-meter 8-lane lap pool, and a 50-meter 8-lane lap pool. And they will each have associated costs. Yes.
Can you just scroll back up for a second there? So I see we have different options for the lap pool, but for the leisure pool, do we not get options on spray feature in shallow areas and lazy rivers? Or is there no options for that? There's just one encompassing feature. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk through it in a second, and then just ask me if you still have a question about it. So for the lap pool, the first option is the 25-meter 6-lane lap pool. You can see where the costs will be displayed. Again, that's just a placeholder at the moment. So if you scroll down, there'll be a small description. This is approximately the same size that is currently at Echo. And it would be 1 meter deep at one end and 3 to 4 meters deep at the other. And maybe Darren, if you just select the 25-meter, just to show how this works. So if participants select it, then on the right-hand side, you will see that it will be added to the total cost. And then where you see the EHC Port Alberni, that's the estimated household cost for Port Alberni that we discussed before. So the actual formula is not built to the back end of the survey right now, but that would update so that you would, with the first feature, you'd be able to see what the tax implication is. So then the next option is a 25-meter 8-lane lap pool. So that's 2 additional lanes to the previous option as to what is existing currently. So provide a little bit more capacity for lanes, swimming, exercise. And then finally a 50-meter 8-lane lap pool, which is the largest option. So that would be about twice the size of what currently exists at Echo Center. And so increasing costs at each one. So participants can choose one of those 3 options. And they can also click one, see the cost implications, and then change their mind. They can also kind of go backward and forward to the survey to adjust things. Any questions about the proposed lap tanks?
So that's just the cost of the actual pool, not the housing.
Yes, that would include kind of the increase in area to the building. So it's not just the tank, but it's the envelope that wraps around it. But so it's kind of as you take a 25-meter tank and then you grow to a 50-meter tank, it's going to increase the size of the building by double, basically, which doubles the envelope, doubles all the environment. It's not just the cost of the tank.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Any others? Okay. So I'll just mention here that the next section, which is not built in, would be the leisure pool section, where there would be options. So we'd have the sort of base size of the leisure pool, and then the first option would be a wave pool, which would be part of the leisure pool. And so we're proposing this to be included because we heard frequently in the first survey that this was something that people are interested in, as well as a reason why people travel to some of the Nanaimo Aquatics Center to use the wave pool. Or did you want to add?
Yeah, just say that's the level of input we're looking for at the leisure pool level for right now. Would you prefer to have a traditional leisure pool, or would you like to have a wave pool? Because we heard that wave pool discussion quite frequently in the previous one. So that's the layer to determine the tank itself. And then beyond that, there's additional features, which would be a slide, or you'll see come up here. There's additional features there. But that's the level of input that we're looking for at this scale are those two things. So that's what we'd be proposing at this point.
So my question would be, so the default is not a wave pool, but a wave pool is one of the two options. Is that correct?
We would have you have to choose one or the other. So you have two options: a traditional leisure pool or a wave pool, and you have to choose one or the other in the survey. Just like in the first one for the lap tank, you have three options. You have to choose one of those to proceed through the survey.
Just out of curiosity, wave pool, is there a significant increase in cost for maintenance?
Yes, there will be a significant operational cost to a wave pool. There's quite a bit of there's quite a bit there, and so we will need to quantify that in the dollar value. So when they see that, the public would look at it. There's a traditional tank is X, and they will see wave pool with a much larger price tag to it. And they will, just to be honest in what that means to the public, if you want a wave pool, it means additional operation costs. Okay.
Okay, yes, please. So there's another question in the Q&A. It says, would the lap pool be used competitively?
Any of those tanks would be able to be used from a competitive standpoint. Obviously, the larger it goes, the more lanes you have, the more flexibility within competition you have. But for competitive training, or for competitions at a regional scale or a swim meet, you'd be able to overlay some of those things. Once you get to the smaller tank, there are considerations like spectator seating or deck space, which you need to have for swim meets. So those just layer on more considerations. And so those you'll need to be mindful of. But all three of those tanks, you would be able to hold a swim meet in if desired.
So the next optional feature is a slide. And this is also a popular amenity noted in the first round of public engagement, and aligns with feedback we heard about increased fun features. So I don't know. I will also explain the scale. So the scale at the bottom, you'll have the cost estimate for the additional feature, and then from totally opposed to totally support. Only the totally support and the moderate support will actually count towards contributing to the overall price. However, the way that Othello, the survey platform works, if participants still select neutral or totally oppose, it will be factored into the option that has the most public consensus. So just something to note there. And so as Darren clicked the moderate support button, if you scroll down, can you scroll down on the My Choices on the right-hand side? Yeah. So it increased the total cost, but if you scroll down, sorry, I'm just, it will also, it'll sort of have a running list of the options that you've chosen. So should we go to the next option is a hot tub. And we know from the first round of public engagement that the hot tub at Echo Pool is well used. And we did hear a lot of people asking for an increased size. So recommend that this is included. And next, sauna and steam room. Again, we heard that the existing sauna is a much liked amenity at the Echo Pool. And we can move on to next aquatic feature would be a cold plunge pool. This would be full of colder water, probably located near a hot tub, sort of part of a wellness zone. And then that will be it for our recommendations for the additional features for aquatic components. We do have a few non-aquatic components as well. So maybe before we get into those, were there any other questions about the ones we just went over?
You want to know about the lazy river?
Yeah, I think Lazy River wasn't there cost to that?
Yeah, we would see Lazy River be included within the traditional leisure tank. So when we have that option on the screen, we'll list the different features that are included. So Lazy River is pretty typical, and we would recommend including that in the baseline as well. Along with things like a zero beach entry for accessibility, tots pool, water features, maybe a basketball hoop, like all those kind of fun recreational elements. Those kind of just come in as a standard for that leisure pool, and we'll describe those when we say what the traditional leisure pool is versus the wave pool. We'll describe those features and say these would be what would be included in that as well.
So I would vote for having those as separate items, not having it all included. I don't know what everyone else feels that's here, but assuming that people want to have a lazy river in that, and we're breaking everything else out, it's just another item, just separate it. That'd be my vote. Thank you.
Those features, for example, a lazy river, it's more about the water area than it is the feature itself. So it's really no cost if you're choosing this size of your leisure pool, right? If it's a 250 meter squared leisure pool, you can choose to take a portion of that area and turn it into a leisure pool or into a lazy river, or you just have it open water. And it's very similar in terms of overall capital cost. And so it's kind of drilling down to a new layer of detail that we're not designing the pool yet. Like we aren't choosing where the spray feature is or what tot play feature is going into this pool yet, because we're not designing it yet. We're just getting general support for the types of tanks. And so really the big cost item at this scale is the size of the leisure pool. Is it a 250 square meter or is it a 500 square meter? Like that's a big ticket that expands your water area, your pumps, your filters, everything like that. Whereas within a certain scale, it's all fairly relatively similar.
Is that size of the pool going to be one of the leisure pool gonna be one of the options coming up here? Because I'm not seeing that coming up here. Thank you.
Yeah, we at this to kind of keep it at a high level, we'd be choosing a typical scale of the leisure pool because at some point it would be hard to kind of pull the public. Someone wants a 400 meters squared, someone wants a 450 or 500. Like I think we're just saying, do you want a leisure pool and what feature? Like what do you want to have in it? Do you want to have a wave pool or do you want to have a leisure pool that has these features in it? And I think those are some of the key considerations at this level, and then the next level you drill down into, where do you want that spray feature? And let's get into how you want to use that option that you chose. Let's lay it out in the way that you want it. So to us, it feels like we want to stay at a higher level, but that's open for discussion. We're open for discussion on it, but the way we're recommending, we kind of keep it at a higher level.
Sarah, I'm just wondering, are you working on the new Strathcona Gardens? I love it.
I agree that it's a nice feature, but having the alternative approval process would not be enjoyed by a lot of the public. Just to put that out there right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So then as we continue to build out the survey, we'll have another section coming up here and it will be non-aquatic amenities. Do you want to add something?
Right. I just want to make sure I just want to make sure everybody's happy with the range of components that we want to get feedback on. And to us, it feels like the tanks, right? Like, do you want a hot pool? Do you want a cold plunge? Do you want steam sauna? Do you want a leisure pool and lap? Like those are kind of the key pieces right now versus kind of other ones. And so, this is the time to say if we think we want to put other items on the table for the public or we keep it at this level. But from our experience, these are the key items to feel like as a community, you've come together and you've said, this is the type of facility we want. And then the next layer is when you get to design how you lay it out and where you put those features and things like that.
Chat.
Offering sizes for the lap pool, why not offer sizes for the leisure pool? I agree that it should be asked in the survey.
What do we do with questions from the chat?
Well, it's a committee meeting. We can keep the questions from the chat for the end, or we can move forward. I think we've kind of answered that question. We have two different size tanks. I don't know, Fred, if you wanted like three, whether we would have like a smaller size, a medium, and a wave pool, or because that is open for discussion and input here today.
We haven't seen the actual question come up here of what the wave pool will be size-wise versus a non-wave pool, leisure pool, blah, blah, blah. Let's get to that question, then let's revisit it if we need to have more options of that one. But I'd say let's carry on for now. Thank you.
So in the first round of public engagement, we did ask the public about non-aquatic amenities as well. And one that we heard a lot of support for was the existing fitness space at Echo. But we did hear that there was a lot of desire for a larger space with better equipment. So including a fitness space in a new facility would be our recommendation. Thanks. So, and then also a multi-purpose room. Multi-purpose rooms can support a range of programming, birthday parties, fitness activities to additional overflow space. Also could contribute to just the feeling of creating a hub of activities and been expressed. And then we have two others, and we can talk about them after. So throughout this study, we've talked about the possibility of including a gymnasium as well as. So we think it would be a good idea to include this as an option, but include the options for having it built with the facility or built later or never. So get some good public feedback on what the public thinks of this one.
So my quick question on this is, why would we change it for this one line item and not all of them? What's special about this? As in, we build it later, but we build a shell now, we put in equipment later. Why are we changing the format for this one question? Why not just have it straight across the board?
I think the reason for this is that one, there's a predominant focus on aquatic facility, but we will also hold the public to understand if there are non-aquatic desires to have included in this. And so we didn't hear enough support to necessarily include it, but we see it as an advantage to understand if we know that that's something that's potentially desired in the future, then in the planning and where you site the building, then you make sure that you have room for future phasing to accommodate it. And so in this regard, we see it as a desire to learn that from the public of whether they do want a gym at all. And if they do, when do they want it to come online? Because in the other method of oppose to fully support, that's all you get. It's either in or it's out. And you don't learn about, do you want this as a future add? It's also really challenging to add in the future a leisure pool, for example. Like once you build the aquatic natatorium, to add a leisure pool in the future is a lot harder to do than to add a gymnasium or a multipurpose room or something else in the future. And so that was the thinking behind it. And we're open to comments on it, but that was the thinking behind it, that this is a branch off of an aquatic center. It's very useful for a community. It's something the community can really benefit from, but it's a bit of a periphery as opposed to an aquatic feature that we're talking about for the community. And so let's find out whether the community wants it now, later, and if we want to plan for it.
Well, my comment would be, this is towards land acquisition size, but there are plenty of other facilities that the city has and the school district has for this, but this is an aquatic thing, not necessarily a whole multiplex thing. I know we have a multiplex that is actually just an arena, not really a multiplex, but this, I don't know if this is relevant or we want to add this in or not. I don't know what other people thought. I would say take it right out.
I think there was a lot of confusion in the survey between the terminology gymnasium or gym and fitness facility. And I think we clarified that last meeting because I know numerous people that I had spoken to said, oh yeah, we want a gym. Oh yeah, we want to go exercise. And it's like, so I think the terminology there.
Yeah, I think it's valuable information to know if anybody in the community does have a desire for that multiplex hub type community center. And a lot of communities are interested in it and find value in creating a social hub around recreation and activity. And so I guess this is an opportunity to ask that question, whether they like it or not. And we it's just an opportunity to ask that question, whether they have interest in the future to make that, because that would inform land acquisition, it would inform planning in the future so that you could future-proof for that type of expansion.
We're going to keep this question in there. Can we add the 5 questions underneath it, whether we strongly support or strongly disapprove it? Have 2 factors in there. That would give you a better idea of if this is actually wanted or not.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is that if they clicked now or later, that then they'd be able to put a scale as to how much they support it? Like a 2-parter.
Just to be clear, if you click now, it adds it into your bucket so that you have included it in your capital cost because you want to build it now. If you click any of those other ones, it doesn't add it into your bucket, and it's just background information for us as a team to understand that, yes, there is a desire of the public to have a gymnasium attached to an aquatic center at some point in the future. And so I don't know if we need I'm not sure having that, like, yes, they want it later, but they moderately support that. It starts to get pretty layered in terms of that. So.
No.
But I do want to go back and perhaps invite the table to speak a little more around Fred's first comment, which does this belong in the survey? Are we diluting, the aquatics discussion too far? Should we just focus on aquatics? Or do we want to go down the path and ask these questions? And I think that I would like to hear from more around the table because I think that's pertinent. Not that the rest isn't, but I think that one's the most pertinent.
Just before you start that conversation, the next slide is for an artificial turf as well. So that would be in that same grouping in terms of, does the community want to see a gymnasium and an artificial turf grouping around an aquatic center? And it's the same question. So I'm very interested to hear that conversation, whether you think this is worthwhile to be in it as well.
I think carry on with your presentation and then we'll come back. We'll revisit. Thanks.
The turf field that that Darren mentioned, so might inform siting, possible additional amenities. So we would suggest if this is something that people feel we should include, that it would be set up like the gymnasium, sort of looking future, now, never. Yeah, thanks. So then the next page is the About You page, where we can collect some information about respondents. So this would be quite similar to what was provided in the first survey, and provided really useful feedback in being able to isolate the responses by area, as well as identifying how the age range or where the majority of people are responding from. So the categories are set up exactly the same. And then we have a few additional questions. Are you a homeowner or a renter? Do you own a business? And there's always the opportunity to select I prefer not to answer. Any questions about that page?
It's probably we have a lot of homeowners that are not residents. So how do you address that? So in the census, they're not going to be part of the Alberni Valley.
We would hope that the distribution of communication would be able to reach the owner, even if they don't live in the property. Sorry if I misunderstood the
it's
question.
where do I live? It's a question. It's not.
Oh.
So was there? Sorry, there is another.
Yeah, I see.
I got a further question to what you just brought up. So if there's a lot of non-resident owners in Sproat Lake specifically, would that drop their census numbers down artificially and skew the actual rate that they would pay compared to the other districts that don't have a second home? Like,
I believe it would drop the census appropriately since that's not the permanent residence.
I think to the first one, I think a description in there could be quite simple. We could just say, do you live in or own property in, or just address that, because you're right, that's a common occurrence. So I think there's a way we can accommodate that.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? So then moving on to the personal results page. So at this point, participants have gone through, they've made all of their selections. Now they're seeing the sort of final cost estimate on the side, as well as the estimated cost per household for the 5 areas. So the first section of the personal results page helps them sort of digest that a little bit. So it provides the definition of the total capital cost, as well as the estimated household cost, where those numbers come from. And then there will also include a section for grants, sponsorships, and donations. Just noting that these are preliminary in nature, and they don't yet include any grants, sponsorships, or donations, but once a preferred design option has been identified, detailed refinements of base capital and operating costs will occur, and investigations into possible capital grants, as well as community sponsorships and donations. And then the second part asks for some feedback on how do you feel about the design features of your aquatic center. And just to note that we're working through the best way to display these options, maybe including more of a bar style, as was with the different levels of support that we saw through the additional features page. But just going forward here, so how do you feel about the associated tax that you'd be paying so they can identify their level of support? And then if this project receives partial grant funding and your chosen pool type and additional features come at a lower cost, what range of annual taxes would you support paying? So trying to identify sort of a threshold. And then we have two additional questions here. If you live in the community of Beaufort, Beaver Creek, Cherry Creek, or Sprout Lake, and your community chooses not to participate in the funding of a new aquatic center through increased taxes, would you support paying higher entry fees to use a new aquatic center? And then the second question is sort of the second part of that. It's more asking residents of Port Alberni that if some of the other areas choose not to participate in the funding of new aquatic center, would you support Port Alberni proceeding without financial support? Or I think we're going to rework this. Were you going to describe?
Yeah, and I think the purpose of these, and we're really open to this, but this is where we need help from you guys. But the purpose of these two questions is to educate the community in terms of when an area chooses to participate or not, there are implications, there are ramifications to it. And do they still feel, do all the information that we received to date, does it still ring true if these questions are asked? And we just learn those aspects about it in it. And so we see value in being able to ask questions like this to help people understand, okay, well, if my community chooses not to participate, I might be faced with the possibility of having higher user fees or decreased access to lessons or things like that. And do I still support this? And learning that pieces of information. And likewise, if you are on the other side and you say, yes, I'm in, however, other areas choose not to, that's going to increase what I have to provide. And therefore, do I still support this if now I'm the only community doing this? We said City of Port Alberta here, but it could be any community, I guess. But do you still support this if now you're the only one doing it? And your rates now go up to be able to do that. So we're trying to tease out the right wording for that. So we would appreciate your feedback in it, but that's the genesis or what we're trying to get at. And we think that's valuable to us, community.
I think this comes into a very political question right now because City of Port Alberni mayors and councillors, officials have said, councillors have said publicly that they will not support the aquatic center without the regional district. So having this question partially is inappropriate because it's only at the City of Port Alberni. And that's my thoughts on that, because that's been publicly stated by the mayor, et cetera. Thanks.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, Fred, and I still think there's merit to, in some way, shape, or form, asking the public, if for no other reason, perhaps even to alter some of what's there. Like in my mind, it would be neat to see when you see under next the breakdown of household costs for Port Alberni, Beaufort, Sprout Lake. If we had the total cost for the options, so Joe here finished the survey, he sees 53 million. He sees the breakdown of cost per household. It would be neat to say, well, Sprout Lake's not going to participate, and then for it to recalculate and show how much everyone else is paying. And then ask the question, is this something that you feel we should have charged at the door, or, is it an all in or all out? Is what I can't take away from any political body saying what they're going to say. But this is not about the political body. This is us about asking residents based on what they understand, what they see as being a good model. And if you remove any components from the greater group, and you're left with per household for 3 or just Port Alberni, even if you live in Beaufort, you can look at it and say, I don't know if I think that's reasonable for Port Alberni to pay all that. And it is that sort of test and opportunity to educate that I think might be a benefit, but I think this table is really here for that discussion.
No, I think that's a really good point. But where do you cut the line of Beaufort doesn't want in, if Beaver Creek wants in, is it going to proceed with 2 people don't want to go in, or 2 electoral areas, or do you cut it off at 1? I mean, there's a very broad line here. And these kind of discussions or these things happen when the multiplex / arena took place, and some people weren't in there and some people were. So it's a very broad question, but it doesn't have enough information, I think, to be useful at this point. Do you say, okay, Beaufort doesn't want in, okay, stop the project? I mean, it's just a survey, but that's going to be a very important question coming forward. Thank you.
Maybe the second question needs a bit of that. The first question, I think, from what I'm understanding, still holds value in learning from the public how they feel about if they were not a participant of it. So it's just the second question we're talking about.
I think the first question, and I mean, that's been part of this city's history for a while, whether you're a resident, and if you're not a resident, you pay more. I mean, that historical ticketing cost structure already exists and has been there, and it was taken away and whatever you want to call it. I think that's a very valid question. The second question is what I have concern about, being directed at a particular body. Thank you.
Mike.
Thanks. So this is like a regional driven thing, not the city driven thing, right? So so it would be interesting to see what happens if certain areas do back out. Now, you said the costing is just for Port Alberni, Beaufort, Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek. You're hoping to get some of the bands interested too. You said you Chucklesit and Hueyat. We haven't talked about Banfield. Isn't Hueyat and Chucklesit sort of the same geographical area per se of usage as there would be for Banfield, but Banfield's not part of this survey? I don't understand how that was to work.
Yeah, geographically, Banfield is out. The reason why some of the nations are still in is that they have a significant portion of their population that actually lives in the city. And so they may want to participate in some way, shape, or form as a benefit to a bulk of their residents that are living in the valley. How we tackle that would be something that I think we'd have to try and negotiate separately with any of the nations that we need to try and negotiate separately, because we're using to the best of ability, a tool that we know how to use. But the reality is that we're going to have to tweak it because everyone's system is a little bit different. The treaty nations, even amongst themselves, have slightly different systems on how they're looking to take part in services. And so, but to the best of our ability, we're trying to fill it in. So Banfield, we feel, is too far out. Although nothing would prevent Director Beckett from saying, hey, you know what? We want to have that conversation. So right now our focus was for this group and not Banfield.
Sarah, interestingly enough, so Banfield and Annapolis, they're in our policing area because they're in my area for my clients. So I'm just wondering, and they just got the road resurfaced and whatnot. I'm just wondering why it's thought that it was too far out, because they've actually been using our school district up until this year, up to, you know, grade 12. This is their very first year, is my understanding. That they're finally supporting up to grade 12 students, and otherwise they'd be coming into our district as well. I just also, on that note, had a question. EHC, is that per year or overall total cost?
That's annual. Yep.
Daniel?
I think what's nice about the discussion is that it would be a lot easier to add people in afterwards. And I think any regional discussion, what I would hope to try and convey through the survey beyond what we're collecting is the impacts of working together versus not. And it's always a choice. And, you know, this is a choice that would be a service and also hits the pocketbook. So, I mean, we want to make sure that for those that are obviously impacted, that's what this survey is looking to do. I don't think people necessarily understand the difference of not participating in a service versus paying at the door. And perhaps if we remove this last question, I still think there would be some value to people seeing the difference. I would be interested if I said, okay, if I don't pay, how much is Brandy going to pay, right? And to see that difference, and just for educational purpose, I'd be like, oh, like we were both in for about $250 a year, and now Brandy's in for just shy of $500. Am I okay with that? Do I think it's you know, can I stand by that? Is one of those things that, if for no other reason, is kind of a good educational opportunity for people to understand the impacts of that. And I think it would be useful to ask in some way, shape, or form. That said, I also hear what Fred is saying, and I think the way that last question is worded is perhaps not the way to ask that question.
Nancy?
Really, the last question, I think rewording possibly, but in order to include it, I think you'd have to have the formulary, as you suggested, that it shows only Port Alberni as the funding factor. But also, I think that you need to ask the city of Port Alberni whether that should be included, because truly it's, if the mayor's group is saying no, I think this is an opportunity for the public to actually get their voice heard. But I think with respect, they need to be asked.
Mike, did you have something?
Thank you. So when this comes to a vote or referendum or what alternate process, whatever you want to call it, where you're going to go, and we all vote in the same day, we can have a mishmash of who's in, who's out, and what the costing model's going to happen, right?
Well, yeah. The reason why this is an important question to figure out is that once, if we were to proceed towards a service, once we establish who's part of that service and we go to referendum, it's not a matter of being in or out. It's if it fails, we're all out, and if it succeeds, we're all in. And so this would be, I think, would be good information for elected officials to have, because potentially when we get to a point where we're saying, okay, staff, we want you to do some due diligence around the creation of the service and pull that in, there will come a time when you'll be in a position of trying to say, okay, we're going to be part of the referendum or we're not going to be part of the referendum. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Terry.
You are not wrong. That is how it works.
Okay, I have a very important question then. So when do we exactly decide if we're in or out, and why would that not be done by the referendum of the people? And if a referendum does come out, is it not by area, and areas can opt in or out based on what their people want, not overall? So it's very specific. Thank you.
So there are many ways that we could structure this, right? And so we could do an area by area referendum around whether or not, now hear me out, because Terry's going to say, hold on, where are you going? Right? And let me back this up before I answer your question, because it's really important. Is all of this information that's collected is then collected so that as an elected body, you can have a discussion around whether or not we proceed to do more due diligence, right? And what that looks like. Now, that due diligence can be like, hey, we're ready to start looking at a creation of a service, and staff would come back with a plan on how we would in 2024 take part in the creation of a service. Now, when we do that, if we do that, as a board, you're also in a position to talk about how it is you would like to decide whether or not you're part of the service. It would be cheaper to do a referendum altogether all at once. It would be more expensive, but not out of line to say, okay, if you want to engage your specific community uniquely to make that decision, we could go in greater depth and do that. So whether that is a formal referendum in Beaufort to say, do you want to be part of a regional referendum? It's a weird question. Obviously, we have to put thought into how we're asking it, but you could structure it in such a way where you're surveying your public to see whether or not they want to be part of a regional survey or regional service, or whether or not they don't want to. If you want it super controlled around how we ask that question, it would be a referendum. If you want it less controlled, we do surveys specifically. But at some point, we're making a decision around the creation of a service, and we have to know prior to asking the public who's going to be part of that service.
Thank you. So we have 5 or 6% of the population doing the previous survey. Making a $50, $100 million, whatever decision based on 5% is wrong. We need to have the actual better representation of the public, and then each individual area opting in or out at some point. However we do that, having the survey making our decisions for us with that low of a representation is problematic and incorrect. Thank you.
So for clarity, the survey is not making that decision for you, right? And that is not, but I just want to make sure that is not the intention of the survey. The survey is to collect information to help us make decisions on next steps. So you're absolutely correct. 5% is not enough. In some cases, that's all we have. So what we're trying to do is build up enough information to help us guide into the next step. Now, it would be very different if you received a survey and only 5% of Port Alberni answered, but 95% of Beaufort happened to be in that. It would be very informative for you and at a very different level than having 5%. And so this is why the survey is important, is that in order to construct the tools for asking the next questions, for moving this forward, we want to make sure we're collecting the right information. So I like that. I like that you're clarifying that, because it is super important. And for any public watching to know that, you're not going to borrow $50 million off of this survey. All you're doing is putting the toe in the water to feel the temperature. And from there, based on that temperature, you're saying, okay, what are we as a group? What are we going to plan to do to go get that additional information? If we had ended at the end of the road where we're talking about potentially borrowing and moving forward, that will be a referendum. Like that amount of money is something that would be a referendum. Question would then become, who's involved in that referendum, and how do we know that we're involving the right people? All this does is take the temperature. And I think to some degree, it's perhaps one of the better opportunities while everything is fresh and people are looking at price tag to understand the impacts of being directly involved or not directly involved. And that's why I say, why not ask when we have that opportunity and the information is time sensitive.
Mike?
Thank you. So if we're not careful, we could end up with this building on the land we may or may not own. Hopefully we do. It can be staffed by people we don't have under our control, controlled by a different government body. So we would be putting out the money for a building and keeping maintenance up with no real control over the structure or the future of it.
Right. I'm assuming I can jump in, Penny. That's okay. Thanks. No, I disagree with that, because if we ended up with the creation of service and that service went through, that service would be fully articulated in terms of what powers we have, what governance structures are involved, what decision-making ability we have. So it's very different from signing just, say, a service agreement where we're saying, right now what we have is a bit of a, we'll give you a bit of money every year to offset some of your costs, and we have equal access to the same fees at the door. Creation of service would be a lot more in depth, and would require that we talk about prior to. We talk about location, ownership of that location, because we don't need to actually own the dirt to be able to own what's on top of it, so long as we have, say, a long-term lease or some other elements. But we have to talk about all those things. It's hard to talk about those in a meaningful way if the public doesn't actually support those conversations. So if we end up at the end of this and people say no, like it's just, like it's just no. Well, as a board, you know that you're not really entertaining any further discussions. You're not going to waste staff time or your time around it, because the survey is very clear, even if it's just 5% is abundantly clear. What we're seeing from the first round of the survey is that it's the other way around. About 85% of the valley is interested in having a conversation. So this is simply the next step in saying, okay, now that we talk about numbers and what's involved, are you still interested in having that conversation? If the answer is yes, then we take that and we come back to the board and say, okay, there's interest. So let's prioritize this for 2024. What should the next steps look like to make sure that we're bringing this step by step towards a meaningful and publicly supported discussion? And so hopefully that answers, but I do disagree that in the creation of service we wouldn't have control. We would. And that would be an important shift for Port Alberni, because in joining a regional service, they would, to some degree, be diluting their ability to make final decisions if we were a regional pool. Now there'd be a different governance structure.
I have concerns about the way that this is going forward as a package. I've always said that in the past, and I'm still having a difficult time as to moving forward with a cost that includes facility, the operating, and future. I would really like those broken up, understanding that that is the cost going forward, but I start looking at operations and okay, it takes staff to run something, but what, like how does programming fit into that? And how does anything else that the city has, because they run a lot of their parks through the Echo facility now. So Sprout Lake has its own parks commission and budget that strictly Sprout Lake payers pay for. So I'm still trying to figure that piece out. John?
Just maybe could you clarify on that in terms of the operational cost, because it is something that you could separate to the facility only, and you could be able to track that quite specifically to the facility. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to understand just a bit further about the value of separating it.
The value of separating it. I know that the city of Port Alberni would like all of their parks to be supported by the regional district. So, but I already pay for my own parks in budget. So I don't want to amalgamate them. And yeah, so I was very much in favor of looking at what the facility would cost us going forward, and then taking a look at the service beside that. That's how I'd like to see it.
Just one comment on that, the survey does have that capability to separate, like the data is there and we can separate that. So from a functionality standpoint, that's not a problem with the survey. The data would be separated or able to be separated.
So going like from the years that we've been talking about this, and it has been a lot of years, I've always been in favor of taking a look at moving forward on this in the same manner that we did with the arena, with a parcel tax. For Sprout Lake, it makes no sense to do assessment base. we would definitely not be entertaining this at all. So, yeah, I know that, you know, you've separated out, but then there's a lot of questions here that are still not answered in my mind.
I think this is why it's such a complex discussion to have, right? And it's like the apportionment method that we're using doesn't have to be the final one. And I think that's why one of the questions in terms of testing tolerance, right? Like it was the question around grants. It's saying, hey, if we got grants or if we got you know contributions in a different way, what's your tolerance per household? What, like, given what you know. And so, you know, it's saying, hey, I'd be willing to spend 100 to 200 per year, or all the way up to 500 to 600 per year, right? The reason why we wanted to ask that question is that if we end up with a different model, and so we go parcel tax, that would work well for Sprout Lake. It wouldn't work well potentially for Beaufort, because Beaufort has a lot of farms that are typically composed of a number of different lots that are sandwiched together. And so they would potentially be paying more than Sprout Lake all of a sudden, and they go, time out, well, if that's the model, then I'm in. And that's why what we wanted to do with this is say, okay, what's the tolerance? And then we'll come back after the survey and have a discussion with the board and say, given what we know, given the tolerance levels that are there, let's revisit this apportionment method. What is the best way moving forward? Because there's a lot of ways for us to break it apart. It's such a complex discussion in and of itself. If I can add to what Darren said, you brought up a good point, which I think would be good for this table to comment on as well. Do we want to break apart the building costs and operational costs and asset management costs so that even when people get to the end, they, like on this example, we have 53 million. Would it be useful to have that broken into three so you could see, is that possible to do? And if so, maybe it just, again, back to the opportunity to educate the public about what we're doing. Maybe that's what we want to see.
So that is what I'm asking for. Definitely. I've always said, looking at this through the years, this is how I'd like to see it broken down so that you can actually see what the facility is costing, what the service is costing, and the asset. You know, we're going to have to put something away in the future, but yeah, it's important. It's important also to recognize that other areas do have parks, commissions where Sprout Lake is unique, that we pay for a bike skills park. The city is coming and utilizing that asset and at no cost. So, there's a bit of give and take here. Just want to make sure that that's all taken into consideration going forward.
I think this is why the apportionment discussion is one that stands on its own 2 feet beyond aquatics, right? Like, because it can apply to so many other areas. I don't think we can compare a park to an aquatic center in terms of numbers, but it's the philosophy behind it. And if we get a good apportionment model that can start working, where people say, yeah, that's fair, I'm okay with that, then we can start exploring if it can apply to things like parks and trails and whatnot, so that we end up, what we're seeking to do as a regional district is find ways for collaboration, for building regional relationships, for working together. And talking money is one of the toughest parts, and it's going to take a number of different conversations to get there.
That's why I'm having difficulty, I guess, with operating costs and programming and service. Breaking that apart is definitely of interest. Yeah. Thanks, Terry.
Just that it kind of goes back to Director Sparrow's question as well. Like, it would be part of an operating contract with the city of Port Alberni to operate the facility on behalf of the regional district, and you would be indicating what costs you were willing to and willing not to pay for as part of the aquatic center, and it would be clearly defined as that. I think that the city of Port Alberni has done a lot of work in the last couple of years of trying to start separating out their facility costs and taking the extra time to do that, but that's part of that operating contract between the two entities, as you would move forward.
I saw Nancy's hand too.
I'm just back to the apportionment. At the beginning of this, is it clear that this is a proposed model? It's not firm, so that people don't go, this is what I'm going to pay? It's clear up front.
We have described that, but it's a good point. I think we should underline it a bit stronger. So I agree.
Harry,
Sorry,
and then-
maybe just put it on the summary page too, because at the very end, you guys have that like your total cost. So maybe just a reminder there too as they get to the end. It's a lot of info for sure.
Fred,
Thank you. I do have one question, Terry. Are we making an assumption that the regional district would like the city of Port Overy to manage this? The reason I ask that is there's a lot of staffing challenges and a lot of loss of service based on what's happened in the past couple of years. And potentially there would be other places that might be applicable, YMCA, et cetera, that we would look to managing it as opposed to the city of Port Overy based on the challenges that they've shown in the past couple of years. Thank you.
The initial discussions, I think back in 2019 with the previous board and previous CAO was that the regional district itself is not looking to get into the recreational services business. You are dealing with QP members, union members there. And so there would be all the provisions of their contract that would need to be considered if we wanted to look at an alternate model. Not impossible by any means, but at the time it was determined that the regional district was not overly interested in running it. It was more that the facility itself was no longer serving the needs.
Fred,
For the clarification, I think we should potentially put that as a future option if and when we get to that point. Thank you.
Just a question about the breaking out the different components. Would we be interested, two questions here, would we be interested in, we have also the total value, but then we've broken out each different area. So estimated household contribution, would that be broken out in each one as well?
I'm hoping the answer to this question is no. That seems like I feel like it's going to get to a lot of number overwhelm at that point. I think that if you had the three components as the summary and then the estimated household cost, I think would still give enough information for people to see that impact. Myself.
I think that percentage wise, I think that we'll be able to see there's a total cost, but you'll be able to identify that it's percentage, which is that makes it up.
That's great. Second question would be, do we want to see all the areas together? Or do you want to, once you select your area, you only see, I'm just wondering, does it cause anxiety to see the comparison constantly on the sidebar? And would it be better to only have the one area, or do you want to see that comparator? Okay, just ask. Want to make sure it's helping and not hurting. That's all.
I think it's the scope of understanding that we are a large community, not just a city and separate areas.
Anything further? Okay. What's next?
Great discussion. Did you have something to? No. So there's just two more parts of the survey. So the next page is the group results page. And so the survey platform will provide a level, like sort of an optimal level of public support that will be displayed in this section here. And then we'll have the cost information again. And this section we are still working through. I'm not sure if there's much for discussion over here. It just shows the approval ratings of the different elements.
Yeah, so the point of this is that you'll be able to compare what you just built in your mind against what others are doing in the community. And so you'll be able to see that, oh, I threw in the 6-lane 25 meter. Actually, 80% of the people who have voted on the survey so far have put in a 50-meter tank or something. Oh, that's interesting, right? So it's just educating you about where the current standings are in terms of who has participated in the survey so far.
Nancy?
So is there a way to make sure people are only doing this once?
Okay. Yeah. So the background of Othello has this that's a common thing with surveys. And so the background has a number of nets to catch those types of situations and safety nets for that kind of stuff. And so is it perfect? Is it going to get no, but it will catch the majority of people, like the same IP address. Like it itself tries to protect against somebody going in and blah, 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 blah. Just do a whole bunch. So yes.
Deb, do you have anything that you'd like to add or questions? Been pretty quiet there.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Penny.
Mike?
So you said it's going to catch the IP addresses. When people have a family of 6, they can theoretically all vote 6 times 1 household. Will this prevent them from doing such a thing by accident?
We can follow up and get a more clearance, but I've asked them in the past, and it's been a number of years, but they do have a mechanism to check to catch a bit of that, like the same household, even though it's different IP addresses. There is a mechanism that they can to understand, like it'll back out some data and say, oh, hold on, look, you have 7 all from the same address or something like that. And if you want to dig into it, you can. If you want to exclude those from it being valid, you can do that. So there are attributes within the system that does try and flag whenever something kind of strange like that comes up. So.
Do other surveys do limits like 2 votes per household or anything like that? Or
we can, like, it has the capability to overlay that, but sometimes we sought value as keeping somewhat open because you may have, there are different perspectives within a household that are also valid, right? And so we want to allow, for a bit of flexibility in there that, if grandma lives in your house, she has a perspective, but also the parents and maybe even the youth, they want to be able to contribute as well. We want to have some flexibility in there, but not allow it to be like cheap something somehow. So yes.
Daniel?
Yeah, there's in my experience with some surveys, there've been like you have a mail out and there's a passcode per household and you can use it for once or twice. The challenge that I've seen in former environments like this is that it usually creates a disincentive. So people then say it's too complicated. I'm not going to bother. Where was that postcard? What was my PIN again? And you get lower survey turnout for a perceived higher degree of security. But on the back end, these filters, people will answer, and some people will try and they'll use their same computer and they'll do 50 surveys if they want. But what happens is that it does get filtered out afterwards, and we can actually see that data to see what was filtered out and why. And I'll flag to another example where somebody actually managed to do, I think it was like 500 and some odd surveys off of one IP address. So I don't know if it was automated or they worked really, really hard, but 499 of those didn't count. So anyway, there are ways on the back end where all that is filtered.
So I have a question also. Someone from the city could say that they're from Sprout Lake. So will they be counted from Sprout Lake numbers then?
Is there going to be paper copies again? Sorry, I have to say.
I think there should be. I know it's a hassle, but it is, back to Fred's point, it's trying to maximize our reach as much as possible.
I agree. Anything we can do to get better public participation than 5 or 6% on such a large project would be very helpful.
So the last time that we did public consultation, I mentioned that, you know, it was two destinations on the same day was a mistake. I wanted to be at both of them myself. Chose to go to Cherry Creek and there was very low turnout. I think that there was a couple of problems. Advertising is key here to make sure that people go out, and I think that having two opportunities is a good idea, but not on the same day.
I think we'd agree, given our it's always good to try new things and to acknowledge when some things don't work. That one didn't.
So were we looking at doing public consultation then with this survey, similar to what we did last time?
Yeah, and that's a decision for here at the table. We see the value of open houses is to raise awareness and help people understand how they contribute to this process. And so it can be valuable. But when, how, best way to do it, you guys know your community best, and you know what the best way is to do it, or if it's valuable. So that's a decision for us here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So we did a mail out to everybody about auxiliary dwelling units within the last couple of months. I would say this thing would be much more financially applicable to a lot more people than auxiliary dwelling units. Maybe we should follow up on that kind of thing. Thank you.
Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, there's no numbers yet. Sorry. We're trying to work out the back end, but that's the idea there. So maybe just on this, just to wrap up our portion, if it's okay, we're hearing general consensus on the format. We've taken into consideration a lot of good comments, and we are going to adjust and tweak questions according to the comments that we've heard to date. We're hearing that the components that we have as options are acceptable from this group. So if there's any further kind of adjustments, we'd be looking for that. We can give you this link that if the committee wants extra time to look at it and provide feedback, we can give you a week and you guys could review and provide further comment if you have anything beyond what you shared here. Otherwise, we're hearing that the components are in alignment and that we can start to cost those and get those together. We've heard some good discussion about how we're presenting the taxation. We've heard comments about breaking out capital, operational, asset management, which we will do on the back end. And so kind of pulling in these comments from this meeting, we'll start to make those modifications.
Under the My Choice section, could you also include per year?
I think we should have this, sorry, Mike, passed around to the community members, because a lot of them are not here and there is 0 members from the city of Paul Verney here, which would be the biggest cost. Well, I apologize, Debbie. However, as the biggest provider of the finances for this project, maybe we'd like to have a little bit more consultation. Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you. My question was sort of going back to what Fred was saying about the gymnasium / fitness center, maybe we pulled out for costing, but regardless of that, we know how much land we need, even if we put that in, like for the parking lot and the building, we have that figured out, and we're going to appropriate that amount of land so we have it in the future.
That's a good point. And so location isn't back in this one, so it was in the first one. And we feel we have sufficient information to be able to help guide a discussion on location. So we have the priorities that people indicated they would want. We know that each one of the locations that was proposed can fit whatever's being proposed here. And so, yeah, we feel that on the location, we don't need to bring it back, but it will be part of the final report.
So I'd imagine there will be a link to the results of the first study so that people could view that. Also, I think there was information in the first one. I remember talking, I missed some of the beginning meetings, kind of. There was talk about the design of the building and what it would look like. So that it would be open and utilized outside if we could, and that type of thing. Also, so I didn't see anything like that in today's presentation.
Yeah, so that portion was captured in the first technical memo, in which we captured kind of visioning and aspirations and things like that. And so now we're kind of at let's identify the scale of this facility and how we wrestle with apportionment models and tax and things like that. And so that's what the value we're getting from this survey is, to understand what is the size of this facility and how much is it going to cost. So
Yes, that's why I was saying a link to the first study so that people could understand that that's still part of the whole design. Thanks. Fred?
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. We're basing these costs off zero grant money from the government, other levels of government, correct? How can we put something in there to say we don't want to do this unless we get half the money paid for by the provincial or federal government in some kind of grant shape or form, blah, 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 so that we don't repeat I don't want to say problems, but repeat the high costs of the airport expansion that went through 9 years ago on the alternative approval process that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, that the no grant was achieved at that point. How can we put something in there and say, yeah, I'm going to pay an extra $400 a year as long as, everybody in Ontario helps us pay for it as well. Something like that. I don't know. Has everybody got thoughts about
that? As Darren looks at one of the questions, so it is one of the questions talking about grants and talking about tolerance levels. We could beef up the language in there to make sure people understand that it's a preference that we'd always seek grants prior to. And then obviously, any further communication coming out of this that we do as a board, we'd want to make clear how decisions are going to be made at the board table. So I think for the survey, we'd want to maybe beef up that language, but then after that, it would rest on us to make sure the public understands.
So as far as grants go, a question to Terry about grants. Do we have to, how far in do we have to be before we can actually apply and get a grant?
Shovel ready, basically.
That means that we need to design and we need a plan and we need all of those costly things prepaid.
Governance.
And
Like we definitely cannot do it before we get an establishing bylaw. So we need like a full establishing bylaw, the ability to borrow whatever we don't make or whatever we don't have with grant funding. We need to have design. Probably a Class C estimate is more ability to get money. But yeah, basically governance needs to be in place and we need to be practically shovel ready.
Can we get a cost on what that would be?
Do you mean of the facility? Like it's
No, just to be prepared so that we can apply for a grant.
Yeah, I can answer that. So assuming everything goes well, board is happy, everyone's happy, part of our next steps would be to talk about how we advance towards creation of service and creation of something that's grant ready. And so that we'd have to get estimates in terms of what it would cost to do the final architecture and engineering. It would be site specific, so we'd have to make decisions around location. So this is why at the beginning of this, when we started this project, we were saying, hold on. It's like, no, don't worry. This is a multi-year project. There'll be numerous decision points that build on one another. This is just helping us set the foundation so that you as an elected body can then start making decisions on those next steps. But there are many more steps before we get across or even within visibility of a finish line.
Nancy?
Do we need to go back to the inclusion of the gym fitness or the gym and turf or not? We still need to go back.
Interested to hear people's opinions on whether that should be included or excluded.
It's interesting you brought up of turf. So I think turf would be a complement to competitive swimming or depending on the deck size, because when you're warming up, et cetera, you either have the deck space to do all the warm-ups, or if you're in competition, often people go outside and do whatever they do, all the stretching and whatnot, and we'll often do that throughout the day. So I think it would be a complement, the turf. In my opinion, I think scrap the gym though.
I think we have a turf close by the existing pool area that a lot of people use already, and my son will be there in a couple hours. That being said, I think these two questions should be taken right up. I don't know if you want to have a vote on that or not. We're doing an aquatic facility. We don't need to add in a whole bunch of other things at this stage. Thank you.
So in our previous conversations, I mentioned that a climbing wall outside, things that you could add to the outside of the building would be advantage if we could plan for them now. And basketball was a big one. Shooting hoops was brought up, not by myself, but somebody else was saying that it was very popular and there was no place to do it. So could be an outside thing. That could be seasonal. So I don't know that really needs to be added at this time, but Sarah.
I was just going to ask, how does Strathcona Gardens, because I see that they want to climb or are getting a climbing wall. Is it inside, outside, just sort of a...
CJ, do you know?
I believe the reference to climbing wall is an aquatic feature inside the leisure pool. That it's not. I don't know that there's another real climbing wall, but I could quickly check.
Carrie.
Just that I feel like there's three things that are non-aquatic related that I think should be kind of grouped together, and that was like the banquet hall, or I think you guys called it like the dry meeting space, like not the wet one, but the one that would be dry. I feel like those three things are kind of outside of an aquatic facility, and were the ones that I was wondering what the committee wanted to do with when I looked at this draft survey.
Nancy, Sarah.
If this is a standalone building, a lack of any kind of meeting room, birthday party, anything, I think would be a detriment within that building, because this is, if it's beside the current Echo, that would be simple to walk across, but if it's somewhere else, it could be a problem. The gym, I'm
Sure.
I'm just thinking about how it's operated now. I think there's a great deck space currently where you can host birthday parties, etc. And of course, it's together with the rest of the building. So meeting spaces, but we, in my opinion, we need an extra room of sorts, because if you're going to have competition, I'll just go to the competitions again. There's food that needs to be provided. There's it's a whole hosting type thing. So I think it doesn't have to be a huge extra room, but something where timers can gather and get that training before, like post or pre competition. So it is important.
Just a lot of that would be handled in the what we call wet multipurpose room, which we are including in the baseline as it is. So that's kind of a part, just for what you said, there's so much aquatic need for a little room adjacent that is, we've just put that into the base thing. And so what we're talking about is an additional dry multipurpose, something like this, just a general room that you could use for a wide variety of community uses. Could be bookable, could not, right? So, yeah.
So I have a quick question. Instead of asking people what they want to use this for, why don't we look at what we actually do use our current facility for? How many swim meets do we have? How many people actually go to the gym, hot tub, sauna, etc.? I mean, I know the cost, it's not profitable by any stretch of the imagination, but how many people actually go to different parts of this thing and what do they use now?
Just to comment on that, it's hard to gauge on existing facilities for a number of reasons of kind of operational model, like shutdowns or things that they can't run it. I don't think it's a fair comparison of what the community would want or would use if they had the facility that met their needs. And so I think we find that when you build a new facility in the community, you see your usership go up, or different dynamics start to engage with, there's different demographics start to engage with the community. It always kind of surprises you how a community adopts a new facility. So yes, it's good data, but it's not it's not a complete picture of it.
Anything else?
I was just going to add to that. Thank you for that. For instance, we actually can't have a swim meet. We can't host swim meets at this current time because it's a 6-lane pool, which is 6 to 10 lanes is quite normal, but there's diving boards in the way. There's a slide in the way of one entire lane. So and there's also stairs that come into the pool, which are fixed now. So it's unusable for swim meets, which Special O and the Port Alberni Aquatic Club could use.
So the reason I'm asking that question is, do we want to have taxpayer funded swim meets? How many people will this help out? That kind of thing. And I mean, is it a special interest group? Are we gonna have 1,000 swim meets? That kind of thing. Just as a gauge, as a reference. Because going from a 6-lane to an 8-lane pool, there's a substantial cost to it, plus everything else.
That's well covered within the survey, though.
I would just comment on that as well, that it's not like you are paying for that specifically for competition. That there's, you would overlay those uses and gain a lot of recreation use or things like that. And so it's hard to say that that would be a cost only for competition, for example.
Well, I would say in that thing, in the survey, say, in order to host a swim meet, we need to have this size, because I go to the pool. I'm not a swim meet user, but I go there on a regular basis when I can actually get there and it's open. And I don't know that you need 8 lanes and no diving boards to host a swim meet, right? That's not obvious. So maybe that could be put in there to say, as a reference, 8 lanes gives us these kind of things. That could be.
Linda Bowers, that was an avid swimmer, wasn't competition, but she used the lanes all the time and said there was a lot of users, so they'd have to book the lanes. So yeah, it's not just competitions that they're used. And being on Viral, I see the new libraries that are being built, and the increase in use in those libraries is quite extended. So I'm sure that a new facility here would bring out new people that had never used the old Echo Pool. It draws people to move to your community too when you have a facility.
Well, I'm not disagreeing that. I'm just saying we need to balance expectations versus cost. And if this thing will go through, picking the best thing for the whole community, right? If we're going to compare ourselves to Campbell River, we don't have the tax base that they do. We are 1/3 to 1/4 of the population. So per capita, our costs are enormous compared to that. So we need to have a good balance and expectations of what we can actually afford. Thank you.
Back to the gym topic. What are we going to guide them to do?
Make a recommendation. You said skip it. Okay, any suggestions? You say skip it. How strong was that in the study that people were saying that they wanted a gymnasium?
The way it's been worded to date was we received feedback on what type of non-aquatic space the community is interested in, and we gave a list of types of activities. So places to play sports, places to learn how to play sports, places to socialize with other people and casually recreate, things like that. And a lot of those things can be done in multipurpose rooms and gymnasiums. And so we first tested the water in the first survey about asking about types of activities people were interested in, and we saw a high level of desire for places to watch and play sports and things like that. And so that's why we've now put the gymnasium on the table. It's not that the community is saying we want a gym yet, but they've said we're interested in these types of activities. And so that's why we're putting this on the table now.
So could it then be phrased to that rather than this now, later, never with a cost, the fact that we are designing an aquatic center, what is your desire to include in our planning, A or B or both? So as in the turf and the gym. So it's not even a cost, because we're not talking about building, we're talking about acquisition, right? Land.
Well, the way this was structured is to first offer to them, do you want to include that in this current project? Do you want it now? Do you want to add it? Is it that important to you that you want it as part of this aquatic center and be included into like a multiplex? Or do you want to put that later? Or do you never want it?
I don't see that there's a big problem with adding it to the survey, saying, just finding out if there really is a need or a want in the community for future.
I think as long as it's clarified between fitness facility with machines and gymnasium, because I know that there was confusion around that.
So do you have direction? No. Deb, do you have anything to add to this?
Thanks, Penny. Personally, I would take out gymnasium myself because there is a gymnasium in that area, which is the Alberta Athletic Center, that is still fairly new and it's well used. So I think this is just going to add to the confusion. My recommendation is to take out the gymnasium. And as far as the turf field, there's a turf field at the high school already that people can go over and use as well. People use it all the time. So that might be another thing we want to take out. I think the more that we can just try and keep it simple, the less confusion is going to be at the end. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you, Deb. So
I think that was well said, Deb.
it was well said. So there's your direction.
Do we agree?
Yes.
Okay. Mike.
That topic's all done. I have another question. The topic all done? Yes?
I think we're clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a weird question. It says a Class D facility, and you mentioned grants for Class C facilities. Is there a different reason on why you can't get grants for Class Ds and Cs? And will you be careful of that one?
No, so as you go up from D to A, you're getting more and more refined and shovel ready. We submit all the time off Class D estimates. The stronger your estimate is and the closer you are to a cost, the more likelihood you are to get grants. But we have to be, if we haven't sorted out governance yet, it's not worth getting the cost higher than a Class D. Like, there's a lot of steps to be had, and you don't want to pay for something multiple times. So I think that this level is a good place to start. And then we slowly refine those estimates as we go through the process and get closer to actually putting the shovel in the ground.
Not a level of the building, it's a level of where you're going through the process towards the building, right?
Fred might be able to give me more clear, but I think a Class D estimate is plus or minus 50%. And then as you go up the ways, you are getting more close to actual dollar value. So there's less like actual design of the building and engineer. Okay, Darren's nodding yes, so I'm in the right direction. So it's just how refined is your cost estimate. So when we are applying for a grant, we have to say what the max we're asking for. And so if we've undershot that value by 50%, and we're all of a sudden now, instead of $1 million, which is a very small number, we're at 1.5 million, but we've only asked for $1 million of grant. That 500,000 we're on the hook for. So as we apply for grants, we're going to want to be a little bit more clear that our costs are aligned, but those costs change at this point every year. In the last couple of years, I'd say every 6 months, if you're really wanting to get a clear cost estimate. So at this point, getting anything more than a Class D, I think, wouldn't be in our favor.
Sarah, did you have something?
I was just going to ask, what is the electoral like amount of residents who are basing all of this off of? How many? Oh.
Final question for me. When you do your cost and you have your estimated household cost, how is that calculated based on number of years of payment? Are you doing 20-year payout, 30-year payout? Can we get some exact details so we're not getting a whole bunch of questions in the future with that? Thank you.
So we will use, when I get some numbers off of these guys, we'll be using the MFA interest rate of the day and 30 years as a base point for our calculations.
And what we can do is there's going to be a number of periphery questions like that one. And I think what we'll do is we'll encourage people that if they have technical questions and whatnot to go back to our FAQ. And what we'll have is FAQs about questions for round 2 surveys. So, how did you get the assessment rates? This is how they're done. How do you do a tax rate? This is how the tax rate would be done. Just so we can clarify that. And if you get the questions, you can point them back in that direction.
So in terms of population, the total population of the Alberni Valley is, on 2021 census, is 26,000 people, thereabouts, 8,000 in the rural areas, and about 18,000 in the in the city limits. No, so 18,000 in city of Port Alberni and 8,000 in the rural areas for about 26,000 total. 33, I think, is the entire regional district.
Is there anything else that you require?
I think this has been hugely helpful, and I appreciate this is a really complicated stepping stone for the community, and so I really appreciate the feedback that we received today. We did have one other item, and I know we're over time, so we may be able to just move on from here. But I'm not the best to speak to it, but there was a comment from the last board meeting about a champion in this project, and I'm not sure if anybody wants to comment on it. But from what I heard was just a question towards the project team in terms of who is the champion for this. We do have an advisory committee. Is the advisory committee the champion, or is it other individuals in the community that are champions of this project? And from my interpretation of the question, right or wrong, is kind of, where are we at in terms of that from a community desire and champion level. So if there's anything others want to add to that, that'd be helpful to hear.
There was champions for the arena going forward that really pushed. I haven't seen those people actually step up for the aquatic center as far as that person. Daniel.
I think aquatics is a really challenging area to find quote unquote champions when you don't have the same degree of organized team sport. I know that there's swimming, but when you have swimming and currently you're in a facility that doesn't have the ability to host meets and whatnot, you're not going to see the same as when you have an arena that has teams hosting tournaments and whatnot. And I think part of the reason why we do outreach around something like aquatics, where our first round of survey indicated that, I think it was number one, people wanted to do this for fitness reasons, right? So it's just a different level. It's a different type of activity where I don't think you're going to see the same champions. If we wanted to go out and find champions, I would likely be, recommending that we go talk to our senior centers and fitness people and the current users, and because there's a lot more individual sport going on than organized team sport right now, is my understanding. So I thought it was a good question, but I think, on ice versus in water is like apples and oranges in terms of that comparison.
So I guess at this point we don't have champions. It would be the community.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think we brought it up just from our experience consulting. We see that as a huge success factor. Oftentimes, is when there are champions within the community for a certain initiative, it really does make a big difference. And so, so we thought that was a fairly a good and poignant question to raise, and those champions really do make a difference.
I actually think that they'll come out of the woodwork as this project moves forward. It's a study.
I do think there were several repeat pro champions in editorials, in particular when the pathways and versus pool was going on. There were a few, but we'd have to backtrack to reach out.
Oh, Deb?
Yeah, Penny, I was just going to say, my kind of vision is that this advisory committee will get it to a point where this is what we're looking for. Here's the design plans. And then we turn it over to a community of champions, a committee of champions that will take it to the next level before the referendum. They'll be the ones that will be going out to the community, generating support, looking at sponsorships, those kinds of things. So that was kind of my vision. So I think it's too early for that part yet.
Agreed. We're early. So is there anything else? That's it. Okay. Any questions from the public or nothing further? Okay. I guess that's it. Move for adjournment.
We'll move for adjournment. Penny.
Thank you, Brad. Mike, thank you. Anyone opposed? Thank you so much for the great work today. And yeah, thank you.